Okay, I think it has started. So congratulations everyone for making to the U-14 quarterfinals. Good job making this far after 4 grueling rounds and breaking. So before we start off with anything and the debate as a whole, I would like to just introduce the panel. So hi, my name is Xander. I'll be your chair for this round. And can the other two panelists also introduce themselves, please?
Hi, Sam. Him. Good luck to everyone.
Michelle.
Hello, hi, Michelle. I'm one of the judges for this round. I go by the pronoun him. I would highly prefer that panel that you refer to us as a panel. All the best, everyone.
All right, so a few reminders before we officially start with the round. Firstly, before you guys start any of your speeches, please do indicate any POI preferences that you may have, whether that be chat, voice, or visually. Secondly, please indicate any gender pronouns preferences so that everybody in the room can respect those pronouns, especially when you POI things or refer to the speaker before you, please also respect them as well. As for the panel as a whole, as Michelle said, please refer us to the panel as a whole instead of addressing a single individual. Lastly, in terms of time reminder, I'll be keeping time in the chat, but there won't be any guarantees that I'll remember to put the time in the chat. So please do keep track of time on your own and please POI during the respective times and please respect the protected time as well. Without further ado, under the motion, this House support efforts to lower carbon emissions, even if it comes at the expense of biodiversity, I would like to call upon the Prime Minister to open this debate. Here.
I would like to check that I'm both audible and visible.
Yep, you're both.
If that is the case, I would like to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. It is beneficial to lower carbon emissions in the short term because it means biodiversity will thrive in the long term. We define carbon emissions as excess carbon released into the atmosphere through human intervention, raising temperatures, destroying habitats, and causing ocean levels to rise, displacing people, worsening natural disasters, and so much more. The tipping point is defined as a point in which the effects of climate change are irreversible and permanent. In addition, we define biodiversity as a large variety of plants and animals coexisting. We'd like to clarify one big thing. The reason we take the stance in the debate is because we want to promote biodiversity. The way we can do that is through stopping climate change, the main killer of biodiversity right now. As our planet is warming, areas are becoming inhabitable for wildlife. And the best way that we can protect our wildlife and diversity is by healing our climate. Biodiversity cannot thrive if animal habitats are being flooded and destroyed by excess heat. Essentially, our burden is to prove that solving climate change in the short term is beneficial for biodiversity in the long term. I'm running an argument about the urgency and climate change destroying biodiversity right now. My second speaker will be running an argument about the reimplementation of biodiversity. To emphasize our stance, we are not saying that we will destroy biodiversity at any chance we get. We are saying we will minimize our destruction of biodiversity, but if this has to happen, we are willing to accept it. We would also support efforts to restore biodiversity in the future by fostering in separate parts of the world to laboratories and nature reserves. My first point is how for climate change, there is a tipping point. The tipping point is a point of no return. Every time that global temperatures rise, it gets harder to bring them down again. Once we reach the tipping point, it makes it extremely hard to stabilize our climate. The longer we take, the closer we get to the point of no return. Due to habitat loss from excess heating, flooding, and extreme weather, there will be no biodiversity if we let climate change continue for long enough. We suggest that biodiversity can be destroyed through ensuring that no species go extinct during this process. Technologies exist ensuring the survival of species, such as keeping them alive in laboratories or nature reserves. One way is keeping them alive to protected areas which cannot be destroyed, full of nature reserves, full of species native to the place, and never being destroyed. However, we would be okay with taking on other as it is vital. This would ensure that every place would still have its native animals while maximizing our reduction of carbon emissions. Carbon emissions need to be addressed right now in the current day because every second we waste is a second closer to the tipping point. This is why we propose fixing carbon emissions now, even if it's at the cost of a few trees. We would allow people who are installing things like hydroelectric dams to remove minimal biodiversity from the area and move it to other areas like nature reserves or zoos where they're taken care of. providing animal caring jobs for people, prioritizing the issue of fixing climate change emissions. This would in turn create a world where it is easier to foster biodiversity, where humans can live a healthy life without the risk of displacement from rising sea levels. We are so much better than oppositions who are letting biodiversity die because their misunderstanding of the situation, of the gravity of the situation, because we minimize it. The tipping point is estimated to be as close as 5 years away, and we are just wasting our time, which needs to stop now. Moving to my second argument about how climate change is destroying biodiversity, because biodiversity is decreasing at a fast rate, species are going extinct at a rate never seen before. All of this due to climate change and negative human activity. This is all happening in the present. We have to stop the cause of biodiversity reduction, rather being the meaningless cycle of watching more species go extinct. We need to address the root cause. A doctor doesn't treat the symptoms, the doctor takes away the reason for the illness. We must stop climate change in order to preserve biodiversity. Without stopping climate change, biodiversity is just going to keep going on reducing. The impact of reducing carbon emissions before biodiversity means biodiversity is able to flourish because there are no rise temperatures killing it. In Ops world, they make a futile effort by keeping areas wild while carbon goes even higher. Judge, you can see even if we buy Ops case, they're still not treating the root cause. As you can see, for all of these reasons, I am so proud to propose. Thank you.
All right, we thank that speaker for that fine speech. The speaker spoke for 4 minutes and 22 seconds. That's 422. Now to open the opposition's case, I would like to invite the leader of opposition. Here.
Oh, yeah. Am I visible and audible?
Yep, you're both.
Yeah, thanks. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel. Unlike the levels of carbon, biodiversity can never be returned to its full existence. If their size burden is to prove you that lowering carbon emission is better for diversity, whilst the solution is killing biodiversity, they never prove you why biodiversity must be sacrificed in order for the carbon emissions to be healed. We're about to propose an exclusive sacrifice of non-carbon benefit deficit. I'm going to do 4 things with these. First, I'm going to tell you the framing and characterization. Second, my counterfactual. Thirdly, our preemptions, and fourthly, my arguments. First, on framing and characterization. First, I'm going to tell you that the basic information about biodiversity. 4 layers here. First, we tell you that having many species of animals and plants and other organisms, it just means that. But second, it means that even if one of the species dies out, other species can fill the place, keeping like a place in the ecosystem. But third of all, we say that if biodiversity never exists, when one species die off, we say the ecosystem crashes due to the food cycle. But lastly, we say that the ecosystem is simple, like corn growing or grasshopper eating. We say that the extinction of snakes due to snake virus means that there's too many grasshoppers, etc. The basic food cycle. But lastly, let's talk about the status quo. What's the status quo look like? First, we tell you that there's still many places to implement dams and trees, such like, for example, areas with lower diversities. But second of all, we say that it's actually better since you can remove environmental damaging places and can change them to be eco-friendly. What is the counterfactual? First, we tell you that we're still going to build hydroelectric dams and plant trees and save environment other ways. For example, use solar panels and renewable energy, which doesn't really harm the biodiversity, but we're still going to use all these hydroelectric dams, just not at the expense of biodiversity. What's the we say that pressure to stop artificial carbon emitting sources like factories using this method is better since we damage less of the ecosystem. What is my preemptions? First, we say that they talk about how they're going to save environment. First, we tell that's simply inefficient to do this. First, we say that it's empirically untrue that it's more efficient to build all these dams in rich biodiversity spots. For example, we say that a lot of those places have to be infested with various obstacles trees as a result for the rich biodiversity. Means that you have to clear all of the trees, which takes up a lot of the time. But second, we say there's a backlash effect of doing this because a lot of the biodiversity actually contributes to resolving carbon emissions, for example, trees and coral reefs. But thirdly, even if you don't buy that, we say biodiversity is simply important, even when considering carbon emissions, because a lot of our food depend on this. Being a prime example, being the Cavendish banana going 99% extinct because of the lack of biodiversity. For arguments, sure.
How are you going to deal with the lack of space on our planet when you're trying to reduce our carbon emissions?
Sure. I don't think there's a lack of space at all. For example, we say you can build dams in those artificial or already artificial expensive places like city or canals. But second, even if you can't do that, we're going to prove like biodiversity is simply important in and of itself when considering carbon emissions. But even if you don't buy that, we say there's a backlash effect of removing this rich biodiverse space in and of itself. Your harms, your benefits do not exist. First argument then why is naturally the natural importance of biodiversity. Why is this true? First, we tell you that there's the ecosystem stability. For example, the ecosystem is able to survive even when environmental changes happen, but even when some species strategy changes, other species still into place. But the benefit from the ecosystem is that it decomposes waste, purifying water, all this good stuff. But thirdly, we say that there's fuel security. You can save for a lot of people because the ecosystem is able to survive more. We can avoid hunger, can have more food for people. But lastly, we say there's stopping climate change. For example, wetlands and forests decrease numbers of carbon dioxide. But second of all, we stop climate change even more, taking the crops benefit on our side as well. There's also the irreversibility point there. Second argument about the value of this diverse species. Why is this true? First, we said if you only focus on measures to benefit humans, they sacrifice the entire balance of the ecosystem, and it completely dismisses the moral value in the life of the species. This is the principal argument right here. First, we say that life has a moral value in and of itself. Even if they were to say that they would justify this because the best for humans, this is a very selfish method because you're using the power you have in dominant species to simply kill off other species. We say even if you lose on the first time, we win on the principle. The impact is that more species and we make a more moral choice. And an inexclusive sacrifice for a non-comparative benefit is deficient. We're very proud to oppose.
We thank that speaker for that fine speech. The speaker spoke for 4 minutes and 10 seconds. That's 410. Now to continue the debate for the side of proposition, I would like to invite the Deputy Prime Minister. You're here.
I'd just like to check again that I'm audible and visible.
Yep, you're both.
My pronouns are she, her, and I'd prefer verbal POIs. If I'm audible and visible, I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Judge, opposition clearly doesn't understand human beings' capacity to stop climate change, and we are realistic, and that is why we win this debate. I'd like to move on to some rebuttals. First of all, they said that biodiversity is very important because of the food chain. If we stop climate change at the expense of biodiversity, then animal species will go extinct. And because of that, the food chain will suffer. We agree with this, Judge. We know the way that food chains function. We know that if you completely bring away a species from a food chain, the food chain collapses. But we'd like opposition to think about the status quo that they are currently protecting. In the status quo, food chains are still being destroyed. Animals are going extinct at an extreme rate. And if we do not stop climate change, this will only continue. We are minimizing our impact on biodiversity. We've showed you the ways that we will minimize this impact and will continue to show you later in my speech. But it is very rare that the only source of food of a specific species is another specific species, and we will be protecting all species native to each country. They also said that biodiversity can never be returned to this full existence, but Judge, that's exactly what we're weighing out here. The options are this: either our one planet, our one Earth that we have right now dies, or we have a little less biodiversity after we mitigate the harms of climate change. They said that we never mentioned why biodiversity must be sacrificed to stop carbon emissions, but this clearly shows that they have no understanding of human beings' current capacity to stop climate change. They say that they don't think that there is a lack of space on our planet in response to our POI. Judge, we tell you that there is. First of all, we only have one Earth. That space is already incredibly limited, as areas are progressively getting destroyed more and more. But let's consider their best case scenario, where no places in the world are currently being destroyed, and we have a really, really good amount of space. Even in their best case scenario, there are still countries who do not have the capacity to solve climate change. Here's why. Climate change is an expensive problem. Creating dams, reforestation, ensuring biodiversity survival like we're trying to do costs money. Solar panels are expensive. Hydroelectric dams are expensive. And third world countries do not have the capacity to do this. They make up a great percentage of our planet, and they are the areas that need this help the most. We have a limited amount of space, especially in a world where people are hesitant to accept climate solutions for their own comfort. We need to sacrifice comfort, and we need to sacrifice our norms right now to ensure that everyone on our one Earth is protected. Because, Judge, we tell you that there's a limited amount of space, a limited amount of resource, and only so much capacity to create this change. And they clearly don't understand practicality. They also said that biodiversity helps stop climate change. For example, trees and coral. We tell you that you don't need a wide amount of biodiversity to stop climate change. This might sound counterintuitive, but if you have a forest of only oak trees, they will also absorb carbon. If you have only a forest of acacia trees, they will absorb carbon. We are not saying that we're going to do this and eliminate every single species. In fact, we've told you time and time again how we're going to protect these extremely essential species. But if necessary, we are going to take the measures to stop climate change because we have one planet. And if we let that planet get to that tipping point, biodiversity isn't even a question. It's a question of our lives, it's a question of animals' lives, and it at a certain point it stops being a question. We are guaranteed to not survive. That brings me on to my point about re-implementing biodiversity. There are existing methods of re-implementing biodiversity, something that opposition clearly does not understand, and protecting biodiversity, something that they completely ignored and failed to rebut in our case. We mentioned protected areas in every single country, something that's being implemented right now in our world, areas where there cannot be destruction of rainforest or animal wildlife to protect the natural species of a country. They don't understand our plan, they failed to rebut our points, and they clearly don't understand the practicality and the cost of getting rid of climate change. And for that reason, we win this debate. Proud to propose.
The speaker spoke for 4 minutes and 17 seconds. It's 417. Now to extend the opposition's case, I'd like to invite the DLO. You're here.
Hi, am I visible and audible?
Yep, you're both.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to start. By the way, verbal POIs, he and pronouns, and I'm going to start my 4-minute timer in 3, 2, 1. Panel, notice how there's like things that they can destroy species and the ecosystem, and after climate change is completely solved, they can bring it back. The thing is, once you destroy species and biodiversity, it is irreversible damage. Our side notices a practical and principal value of biodiversity, so we take measures into reduce carbon emissions, not at the expense of biodiversity. And an inexclusive sacrifice for a non-comparative benefit is a deficit. So proud to uphold. 2 things to prove in my speech then. First, which side benefits the climate and the earth in a practically effective and morally correct way. And second, which side protects cultural and economic value in my third argument. I'm just going to then answer my first question by first engaging with their side. Their side tells you, like in the first speech of their side, they're going to bring biodiversity back. It's just not their priority. Rather, they just want to destroy it first. I said this before, and Sean rebutted to this entire case of their side. But once you prioritize their world, Judge, biodiversity is not an option to bring back. I think their side noticed the importance of biodiversity as well, which is probably why they said that they will try to bring it back, and climate change is the one that will decrease the biodiversity. But I think we told you that before climate change actually takes out biodiversity, we take ecosystem-based measures, like measures that don't attack ecosystems. They say that like they know the way food chains. They told us that they know like the way food chains like operate, and they know the importance of ecosystem, but animals are going extinct right now, so they know the urgency, right? But the thing is, first of all, on both sides we try to reduce emissions. Your side reduces emissions by and forcefully sacrificing biodiversity. Our side protects biodiversity and try to reduce carbon emissions with solar panels that don't threaten biodiversity. Our side is comparatively better in the practicality. Also, their side tells us that these are very expensive methods, and every method just to solve climate change is expensive. I think your side is going to have more financial loss because, as Sean told you, your side cuts down the Amazon to build dams there. Instead, we build those dams in already artificial infested areas and rather rely on renewable resources that don't threaten biodiversity. And they say that they're not going to eliminate every single species, to only protect the important ones. We just went on the principle because we realize that all life has moral value, not specific kinds of trees only. I think I'm just going to then engage in why our side is better in the comparative. We build breaking down toxic factories, like plant trees in places that has little number of plants and animals, right? And also, what's the impact of this? We have a stable ecosystem. We have lots of food for people, and we stop climate change better, and we get ecosystem helping out people with other practical usage of importance. I think I'm just going to note the final way here before I move on to the third argument. I think comparative is this. You irreversibly damage the ecosystem just for the sake of humans. At the same time, you comparatively completely undermine the culture and economic value of and then instead we take alternative measures to reduce carbon emissions like renewable energies and maintain principal and practical value of these places. Before I move on, take the POI.
Can you please respond to our ideas about protected areas?
Okay, the idea that you told us about protected areas was that you're going to cut down trees and you're going to cut down places that are like that have biodiversity just because of the fact that climate change is going to wipe them out. I think the only idea that you guys have is to just sacrifice biodiversity and to never get it back. I think I'm going to then engage on cultural value and economic value as my third argument. I think that ecosystems such as beautiful and unique forests are basically a part of culture of many areas, right? And it's just, we just tell you that it's just simply wrong to destroy the entire area just to implement destructive artificial measures that doesn't even bring back biodiversity in the future. The destruction of species is basically irreversible, right? But also we tell you that in the economic value, right? If you actually destroy this, is this going to bring us more financial loss? Because obviously ecotourism earns a lot of money. And obviously, if you actually just completely undermine this and start cutting down trees in very diverse, biologically diverse ways, it's just not going to bring back profit. It's going to lose profit. It's going to have economic loss, right? I think at the end of the day, an inexclusive sacrifice for a non-comparative benefit is a deficit. So proud to oppose.
We thank that speaker for that fine speech. The speaker spoke for 4 minutes and 5 seconds. That's 4:05. Before we move on to the government whip, a few reminders that only give POIs during the time allocated. Do not infringe on the protected time. And secondly, just in case any observers are opening their microphones, please do close them as to not disturb the debaters. Without further ado, I would like to invite the government whip to end the substantive portion for proposition. Here.
Okay, give me a second to set up my timer. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Now I'd like to start off with some drops. First speaker offered no POIs at all, and only one POI was offered on the second speaker. They completely dropped our point about protected areas. They engaged with a watered down artificial version of our point, saying that we claimed we would completely destroy biodiversity and not engaging with our point on protecting biodiversity at all. They seemingly engage with our point, but they don't even understand our case. We've engaged with all of their points and panel, that's why we win. They said that trees aid in the fight against carbon, but opposition continues to ignore the key point in the debate, the fact that we are running out of time. We have to eradicate the direct source of climate change instead of encouraging the hopeless trees to absorb all of our laziness. Now, first opposition speaker has stated that we need biodiversity to stop climate change. Now, completely untrue. Because of what my second speaker said, a forest of oak trees absorbs carbon. Now, you said that we would use our position as a powerful species to kill other animals by stopping carbon emissions. Hopefully the panel can see how ridiculous this is. We're trying to fix the errors of our past. Opposition resists to agree with the fact that climate change is the primary source of death among biodiversity.
Why?
Yes.
Okay, so like solar panels have become one of the most efficient forms of alternative energy and pose no risk to biodiversity. Why not use that instead of something that kills off species?
Because number one, solar panels are extremely expensive to make. Number two, we can't implement solar panels everywhere, such as in developing countries. And also solar panels they don't provide that much electricity. They don't provide enough to boost the entire planet and eradicate carbon emissions. Now, they had a point about ecotourism being important to the culture of an area, not engaging with our ideas about protected areas, ignoring the fact that they are also exclusive in interesting areas. Now, moving on to my clash, who really benefits biodiversity in the long run, right? So the proposition clearly does, because we eradicate the possibility of climate change harming the natural environment ever again, which is the biggest harm to our natural world. Although it has been mentioned a lot of times by proposition, let's look at the irreversible harms of climate change. It would cause the rising of sea levels, killing habitats and communities of people living on the coast. It would worsen disasters, further destroying small communities and habitats. Opposition has completely ignored that in their world, there are going to be hundreds and thousands of people who die due to rising sea levels destroying communities, rising temperatures, and natural disasters worsening, terrible hurricanes destroying millions of people and families, right? So when we reach the tipping point, we cannot control how many millions or billions of people die. Animals and plants will die off once the tipping point is reached. As we said, the tipping point is a place where climate change cannot be reversed and the effects are permanent. No matter how many times we mention this, the opposition refuses to engage. The opposition aims to paint the proposition as some evil entity that would kill an animal in hopes of solving climate change, and it will kill any plants, any animals to make that happen. And we say that our side protects biodiversity more because this is simply not true. I hope the panel can see that they are trying to paint us as some evil entity, but that is just not the case. We benefit biodiversity much longer because we benefit them in the long run by eradicating the source of their death. Okay, and in their absolute best case, they would reach the tipping point and hundreds of thousands of people and animals would die. And in their worst case, and in our best case, in our worst case, we would aid the lives of so many animals and plants and essentially better their lives because we are eradicating the source of their death. Now, they have also completely ignored the point of urgency. Urgency is one of the most crucial points in our debate, a point opposition rarely engages with, surprisingly. The tipping point, we have to address the problem of the tipping point. They have failed to do this, and therefore, Judge, we care about our planet, our one planet, our singular planet. You can tell that opposition doesn't, and we hope you can too. Thank you.
The speaker spoke for 4 minutes and 20 seconds. That's 420. Now to end the substantive portion of this debate, I'd like to invite the opposition whip. You're here.
Hi, am I visible and audible?
Yep, you're both.
All right, share pronoun and POIs verbally. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Judge, I really love how side proposition wants to help save trees and flowers. But the point is, if we want to save trees and flowers, building a dam on top of it is not going to help. As we said, an inexpensive sacrifice for non-comparative is a deficient. So proud to be on side opposition. So the vector of this debate is a journey debate. Both sides want to preserve the environment. It leads onto the clash of which side actually helps the environment in the long run. 3 subclasses in this clash. 3 things I'm going to prove. First of all, I'm going to prove to you why under opposition, a coexistence of solutions for carbon emission and biodiversity exists even better. Second of all, I'm going to wait on reversibility and urgency. And lastly, I'm going to prove why even if everything I say isn't true, in our very worst case scenario, why biodiversity still weighs over carbon emission. So first, let's go over why our side can receive a coexistence and a balance, but even better. Our side's exclusive benefit of not harming biodiversity while also being able to reduce carbon emission still stands in this debate. So solar panels, like Tesla cars, the renewable energy, right? I think the only rebuttal is they give turbo. First of all, they say it's expensive. I think first of all, in terms of finance, their side is less efficient. First of all, dams are also expensive as they can see. But then second of all, it's even more ineffective because as Sean already told you in his speech, you need to develop new areas that aren't developed yet in order to build these technology that helps reduce carbon emissions in these areas, right? I think this is even more inefficient in the sense that it's actually developing areas that are not switched yet. But then second of all, we're willing to receive funds if necessary. But then lastly, the importance of biodiversity still weighs over. Now, what's the importance of biodiversity? Things like benefit purifying water and soil, like food security, culture and economic benefits. And also notice how undeveloped areas, like for instance, unreached areas in the Amazon forest, trees are already contributing to decreasing climate change, and you're getting rid of that. Trees are actually more efficient in the process of solving carbon emission. But the last rebuttal we have is that there's a limited amount of space under our side. I just simply think this isn't true, especially as they say that there are already protected areas. I think you can just avoid those protected areas and build these like artificial dams in areas where those biodiverse ecosystems do not exist. Let's have my second clash. I'm going to wait on reversibility and urgency. I'm going to take their best in which they actually achieve reductions in carbon emissions. First of all, why their science process is irreversible. By the point in which carbon emissions are decreased, biodiversity is down to the extent where it is irreversible. If species start going extinct within that ecosystem, first of all, we see that the extinction itself is irreversible. But the more important thing is, when one species goes extinct, the whole ecosystem falls and the biodiversity is small. It means food chains are no longer going to be sustainable, meaning all species within this specific ecosystem is going to be endangered and they're going to go extinct. Let's wait this on urgency. First of all, I think there are already policies that increase awareness on decreasing carbon emissions. It already has a lot of development, and there are already artificial places in which dams are being built. Then they say that protected areas already exist under their side as well. I think this literally makes no sense because there's cannot simultaneously claim that they're going to protect biodiverse areas, and then at the same time, they're also going to build dams on top of them. They're also going to replace a section with plants and flowers and just basically plant a bunch of trees that don't even fit that environment. But then lastly, even if everything I'm going to prove why even if everything I said isn't true, in our very worst case scenario, why biodiversity is still way over carbon emissions. I think in the sense that as our first speaker told you, there is an intrinsic value to life, and we should value the species right of it. I think that itself is a principle they never engaged to, that we should still keep it to be them. But then second of all, as I told you in my speech, you cannot bring an extinct species back. If a species goes extinct, like for example, like if a grasshopper goes extinct in a food chain where grasshoppers are essential, I think it's impossible to bring that ecosystem back after you already fixed all those carbon emissions. But then at the end of the day, only including my first subclass, they cannot also achieve carbon emissions at the end of the day. So as we said, an inexpensive sacrifice for non-comparative benefit is deficient. I couldn't be more proud of you as well.
All right, the speaker spoke for 3 minutes and 59 seconds. That's 359. Now to end off the opposition's case, I would like to invite opposition reply. Here.
Yeah, am I visible and audible?
You are audible, you are not visible.
Yeah, sorry, I had to grab my timer. Yeah. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, let's take a step back and notice they provide you at still zero analysis of why building on rich biodiverse places has such a big impact. I mean, if they say that they're going to put every places as protected areas, I don't know what is different from their side to our side. That claim just hurts them at best. They're shooting themselves in the foot. I'm going to prove 2 things here. Firstly, I'm going to tell you why our side saves the environment more, but second, I'm going to talk about the inefficiencies of their case. First of all, then about how their main push about they're going to save the environment and they're going to get rid of the main trucks. 3 lyrics here that came from all 3 speakers from the entire bench. First, they tell you that's simply inefficient. It is empirically untrue that it's more efficient to build all these dams in richly biodiverse spots. Firstly, a lot of those places have to be infested with various obstacles, such as trees as a result of the rich biodiversity. So you have to clear all these trees, which is really inefficient, and you have to develop on this previously undeveloped places. But second, we told there's a backlash effect. A lot of the biodiversity contributes to resolving carbon emissions, for example, trees and coral reefs. But thirdly, even if you don't win that point, we say biodiversity is simply important, even when considering carbon emissions. For example, we say it impacts us humans, as a lot of our food depends on this. A prime example being the Cavendish bananas, which I stated from the previous speech, the Prime Minister. But lastly, we say that there's a principal harm here that they've yet to engage about how every single life matters. You shouldn't just put a dam on them just because you should stop and you should resolve climate change for us. What's the final weighing here? Why do we win this debate? First, we tell you it's going to potentially draw back a lot of the carbon emissions anyways as you remove all these trees and you develop on these previously undeveloped areas which are rich in biodiversity. But second, we tell you that it's inefficient. It's likely to be inefficient since you have to clear all these rich biodiverse spots. That takes a lot of time and money. Their side's losing on the financial term. But thirdly, we say that even if that isn't true, there are literally alternative ways that are better, such as building solar panels, windmills, or simply just building these dams or whatever in already artificially infested places, such as canals or city rivers. We say their side loses on exclusivity. We're very proud to oppose.
All right, the speaker spoke for 2 minutes and 6 seconds. That's 2:06. Now to end off this quarterfinals as a whole, I would like to invite government reply. Here.
Once again, I'd just like to confirm that I'm audible and visible.
Yep, you're both.
Okay. If that's the case, I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. So first of all, really quickly, I'd just like to bring up some late material from them. They finally rebutted our point about efficiency in their reply speech, and it was a completely different rebuttal from their third speaker, who instead waited out for urgency. For irreversibility, which is really strange. So moving on to some clashes in this debate. First of all, the clash of urgency. They tell us that once carbon emissions are decreased, species will also already be destroyed. which is a complete assertion. They don't tell us how or why. They engage with the most convenient version of our case for themselves. They engage with the idea that we're willing to destroy every single animal on this planet. We're willing to destroy huge amounts of biodiversity. That is not what we've said at all. We've said that we're willing to destroy biodiversity in the worst case scenario, if that's necessary. We've told you how we're going to mitigate our harms and how we're going to destroy the least amount possible. So clearly they don't have the capacity to engage with the case that we've given them. They engage with the case most convenient for them. There's a clash of irreversibility. They constantly, as I said, engage with the idea that we're totally destroying biodiversity. They take the worst, untrue version of our case and don't deal with the reality of our case. We have ways to preserve biodiversity too, and their failure to understand this was a great mistake. Then there's a clash of life and protecting life. They claim to care about every single individual life, every single piece of biodiversity, every flower, every tree, and then they forget about the fact that people are dying every single day due to displacement because their homes are flooding, there are droughts, they are dying from dehydration, and they are being forced out of their homes. And in the next 15 years, there will be mass migration, which leads to not enough space on our one planet, our dying planet, for people to live. They are weighing out a flower in the now, maybe a forest in the now, for thousands of human, plant, and animal lives in the future. We understand the urgency and the capacity of the situation, and that is why we win today's debate.